Hey, so today I want to talk to you about the scientific method. If you've ever taken any science class, even back in elementary school, you're familiar with the scientific method. And the reason why I'm going to go through with it is because I want you to recognize very clearly that sociology is a science. It's a social science, not a natural science, but it's very important that you recognize that we are trying to understand the social world in systematic, scientific ways. We're not just trying to make some guesses as to why people do X, Y, and Z. We want to be able to say, if we can understand it, if we can see it, then we can understand it and study it and figure out what to do in society. Remember, I mentioned to you Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte, the father of sociology. Remember, he's not the person that came up with the word sociology. He popularized it. What we actually know him for is this concept called positivism. Positive, not like the opposite of negative, but positive in that if we can see it, if we can observe it, then we can measure it. If we can measure it, we can count it. If we can count it, then we can analyze it. For sociologists, this is a big deal because there's a lot to understand about social phenomena. Positivism is just the scientific study of social patterns. So if we ever want to understand something, then we use the scientific method no differently than any other science. So here's what I want to make sure that I point out about the scientific method. There are six parts. The first of them is this is so weird for me to have to do this. I can't make my list the way that I would because this writing pad doesn't let me see what I wrote. So you ask a question. That's your first step. Why do people do X, Y, and Z? You want to understand what's going on. That's the first step of any scientific method. Number two, this is important and I don't want to pass over it. You do the research. Sometimes we call this doing a literature review. When you're looking in a peer review article and that's that long introductory piece and you want to just fly through it and say, just get on with it. Tell me what your research is about. What did you study? How did you set it up? What are the conclusions? The reason that we want to understand literature, what's been published, what's happening in that situation, is think about those same three sociological buckets of thinking. What has other people what have other people come to find out about this question? In everyday life, when we have a question, we go to the Google machine or we go to Wikipedia or we ask Siri. When I just want to go look and think what's going on, maybe I'll ask. But scientifically, I don't want to just ask and cherry pick what it is I find. I want to be able to set up my research and say, how do I figure out how what I'm doing fits into the larger scope of that science? So I do a very large research review to understand the literature. And I get to say, for instance, when Durkheim asked this question, he started here. And then this person said this after him. And then this person said this after him. And then somebody else conflicted with what he said here. And then somebody conflicted with what they said here. Because they're either going to leave a gaping hole that I'm going to fit in, or they're going to say something that I disagree with, and I have to say why. And that's what my research is. Or I'm going to say, well, they did that study in 1975 and nobody's done it since then. So that's what I'm checking to see. How has the world changed? So in that method, you're going to go first and figure out what other people have said. The third thing you're going to do is develop your hypothesis. And the thing that I want to point out here, because, this stuff is in your textbook also, is, the hypothesis just tells me how variables relate to one another. Typically, for instance, a variable is just something that varies. So people vary in height. People vary in how many years they've been alive, right? So age is a variable, height is a variable. I can hypothesize something simply that says, until a person is the age of 18, height, as a person is taller, they are also older because for a long time that is the case, right? As height goes up, age goes up. That's just a hypothesis, right? I'm just telling you how one thing varies with another. This is important in all sciences, but in sociology or in social sciences, I want to make clear a couple of things. One of them is you have to operationalize your variables. So operational definitions. Even if I'm talking about something like height, I might have to be clear. Am I saying height in inches? Am I saying height in centimeters? That's basic though, because there's not very many ways to study height. But what if I wanted to understand the relationship between socioeconomic status of your parents and college student success? What am I measuring then? There is no socioeconomic status ruler, right? We tend to think of things like your parents' educational level, or your parents' career, or your parents' annual income, or whether your parents own their home or rent their home. All of those things help me understand socioeconomic status. I want to understand what that means for your college success. So what might I look at there? Maybe I'll say, what's the prestige of the school you went to? That's successful. Maybe I want to say, what is your GPA in your freshman year? Maybe I just want to say, um, have you gotten any particular honors or rewards? So college success has to be operationally defined for me to be able to tell you how these things vary and how they relate to one another. If I was looking at how socioeconomic status of your parents relate to your success, I would call this my independent variable, or independent variables, because there's multiple in socioeconomic status. And I would call these my dependent variables. The dependent variable is what I'm studying. The independent variable is what the input of the experiment is, or the research. So I do develop a hypothesis. That hypothesis is going to be related to the variables that I want to study, how they relate to one another. It's very important to recognize in sociology, in all sciences, but especially in sociology, you have to operationally define those variables in ways that we can observe and measure. That's why the research matters, because we won't necessarily be the first person or the first researcher to understand socioeconomic status. So maybe the research will tell me, how have others studied socioeconomic status? And maybe I can just use the variables that they used in a way that is related to the current data. Same thing, I might be saying this other study in trying to understand college student success only looked at GPA. I think it's important that they're also looking at the kind of words that people use in letters of recommendation, because I might say the study will show you something different if you pay attention to this other variable or this other way to operationally define it. So how you define these variables are important. There's three other parts of the scientific method. Number 4 is, once you have that hypothesis, you conduct your study. And your design of that study is important, because you want it to be valid or have validity, and you want it to be reliable or have reliability. These are important concepts, again, not just in sociology or social sciences, but all sciences. The important thing is, are those variables that you came up with actually helping you to understand socioeconomic status? Someone might say that parents' level of education is important in understanding socioeconomic status. But another person might say, or another researcher might say, I don't need to know so much whether your parent has completed college, because you might have a parent or it be in a particular neighborhood where parents normally go only to the 8th grade, but they own businesses, or they're politically involved, or they are, successful in their own right in some way. And is that a question of socioeconomic status? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, when you say you're going to figure something out, like socioeconomic status, are you being valid in doing so? Because when you conduct your study and when you come up with your conclusions, you're telling people, my research tells you something that is important to social understanding. And so it needs to actually be what you said it is. The other thing is that it also has to be reliable. If somebody else did this study, are they going to find the same thing? Um, is it going to be consistent in the way that it's set up, in the way that it is designed? So again, you don't want to just willy-nilly do something. You're trying to be very systematic. You're trying to be very scientific in your approach. So you want your study to be reliable and valid. In that fifth step, you will determine your conclusions. But the reason why I also go through this conversation about scientific method, even though you tend to find it in the textbooks, is this number 6 part usually is missing. And I think it's very important. Number 6 is you have to communicate your results. If you don't, then the person who's going in that second step, trying to find out what kind of research has been done, they're not going to find what you've done. We only get those 3 buckets of those sociological perspectives because when you do research, you participate in the conversation scientifically of what's going on. When we have a class like Sociology 190, the Introduction to Sociology, we have no theories to talk about. We have no things that we understand if people don't communicate their research. You go to conferences, you write books, you publish journal articles, you talk to your colleagues, you let people know what you are contributing and how what you're contributing relates to something else that's been created before. That's how we continue to grow our understanding. So I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to add number 6 to the conversation. Okay, see you in the next video.